Hello, and welcome to 8:30 Live. And YouTube's still kicking in, and obviously the live notification is going out. But, oh, good, here we go. YouTube. Hello again, and welcome to the 8:30 Live. Today is a special day, a day we've spoken about many, many times on the live leading up to it, and that is Juneteenth. Now, I'm not going to do the whole rundown of what Juneteenth is. You should know it by now. And if you don't know it, because you haven't been watching the program, Google it. It's a great time. Every website in the world is doing their own version of Origins of Juneteenth because it's hot. And so I encourage you to go check it out. And there are a lot of actions taking place this weekend. But what I will say is, for those of you who couldn't get out to celebrate Juneteenth or couldn't think of something to do to commemorate the day, or just, didn't have time to do anything, this weekend is a great opportunity to participate in some electoral work and get folks of color and who speak for equality and for defunding the police and for reducing brutality. Get out and make some phone calls for them, make some donations. We've got, they're even doing canvassing now. So there are lots of ways to get involved. Find a candidate near you. We've got primaries on June 23rd. We've got Congress. We've got state offices. So if you couldn't find something to do today for Juneteenth, or even if you did, the true commemoration of Juneteenth, like pretty much every American holiday, is to do something political, engage in self-governance, and change our society for the better, because there's always that opportunity, and we always must be exercising it. All of the protesting in the world isn't going to have a long-term impact if we don't also send our leaders a message that we're going to vote on the matter and that their jobs are at risk. So let your friends know that there's a primary coming up on June 23rd. Make some phone calls. Like I said, get involved. There's only 1 week left, or a little less than a week left to take that action. And it's the perfect celebration for Juneteenth. That being said, after this, I'm going to have my rice and beans and relax for a little bit. And I'm going to relax by watching Watchmen, which is free on HBO for this weekend. So you can also do that. But don't let that replace making a difference electorally. Just watching some content that has to do with Black history, particularly Watchmen, which happens to also be fictional, certainly doesn't make up for doing something that changes the face of our society. So with that, we can get into some of this news, but let's see if there's any comments here. Dorian Key, you playing Last of Us 2 like everyone else right now? I'm not. I'm doing an 8:30 live, and then I'm going to watch Watchmen, and that's pretty much it. I wish I played more games, and it was my New Year's resolution once to do more gaming, but I failed in my New Year's resolution, and these days I'm actually quite busy, and I have a lot of work to do for the upcoming state committee meeting, which date has not yet been set, but I've got a lot of resolutions and rules changes I want to put forward, one of which happens to be about police reform, and then I guess we should probably pass a resolution in support of the governor's idea. I don't know if his idea, the governor's desire and push to make Juneteenth a state holiday through legislation next year. It is already through executive order a New York State government holiday, but to make it a state holiday takes legislation. So, Michael Kaplan, did you watch Go Go Godzilla? Yes, I watched Go Go Godzilla. It was energizing. Thank you, Michael. Simon Sachs, Yale is giving free Black history course. Yeah, listen, if you want to be educated on those sorts of things, definitely, I think that would be a great thing to do this weekend. But I really do want to stress that all of the learning and education in the world is still not a substitute for the electoral work that changes the actual functioning of our society. So if we want a police department that holds itself accountable, really, if we want a government that holds the police accountable, if we want rules that are equal and just, if we want to end discrimination, if we want to make gains in all of these things, education is a very important part. But the other really important part is to get involved electorally and let our leaders know that their jobs are on the line if they don't take action on these measures. And that means just because the elections for the June 23rd primary happen to be around the corner, getting involved even over this weekend to make a difference in GOTV for candidates that you believe are sending the right message. So absolutely check out those free Black History courses from Yale. But every time somebody says something, you can do this, I'm always going to come back with, yes, but don't forget about the elections. They're right around the corner. They're so important. I want to break this down for folks just a little bit, actually. So voting records are public. And they're public by area and by name, right? So if you vote, it shows up in what's known as the voter file. So if everybody in New York City says, hey, we're really angry and we're paying attention now, and we weren't paying attention before, and look, we're going to make your lives hell as politicians over this issue, and then the election comes around and there's no change in voting behavior, politicians can actually see whether or not it's their district that's voting, whether or not it's this block that's seeing an uptick in voting, whether or not there's an aggregate surge in voting. And so they don't actually care if you don't end up voting. They'll just look and be like, oh, nobody in my district voted, or this pocket over here that doesn't vote for me anyway saw an uptick, but nowhere else saw an uptick in voting. So they will call your bluff. If you're like, oh, we're all going to protest and you better pay attention, they will call your bluff. They'll just wait and see whether or not all of you folks are voting. So if you're not voting, if you're not encouraging other folks to vote, if you're not helping candidates win, if you're not doing that extra work, you can't really expect our political culture to change, and then you can't really expect our laws and society to change. So definitely educate yourselves on Black history, know what the deal is, understand what it is that's being called for policy-wise and why that's the proposed solution. But we also need to ensure that we get the right folks elected and that we send a message that we're not going to just sit on the sidelines and yell into the ether. We're actually going to threaten people's jobs with our ballots. Okay, so Christina Lemoyne. I played competitive Scrabble. I played Bidwist. Competitive Scrabble. I'm not that good at Scrabble. I'm bad at Scrabble. Let's put it that way. I mean, I have the best words, but I'm bad at Scrabble. Michael Kaplan. Watched a few episodes of Blackish for the first time today. It's a thought-provoking show. Simon Sachs. Well stated, Ben. Thank you, Simon. I appreciate that. And Michael Kaplan says also watch Selma for the 5th time. Selma, is that good? I wanted to see that. Is that on one of the streaming services? Please let us know so that I can have some things to watch in the near future. That being said, let's just cover a little bit of the news today, and then we can do some maybe that thing that we do. What's it called? The Magna Carta, and then I can go watch Watchmen. So just so that folks know what's happening today. Oh, you know what happened today? City Council did some stuff. City Council put up 4 measures to reform the police, plus a bonus. So I'm going to cover 3 or 4 quick things, and then we'll get into that, because what the council did, well, we should just be aware of what legislatures are doing, right? Michael Kaplan says, great movie, BET was playing it, and I don't have cable, so I guess I can't watch it. So first, remember how we were talking yesterday about that giant dinosaur egg that was found in the Arctic? Well, today a giant squid washed up on a beach. Now, I don't know if you're aware of this, but giant squids are quite rare, and they don't just wash up on beaches. So, 2020 is still full of surprises, folks. Folks have been saying that everything that Watchmen predicted is coming true, and I just want to go through the checklist of Watchmen, 1980s comic about a dystopian future, how that stacks up with what's going on in 2020. Civil unrest, check. A president who is corrupt and is okay with a 3rd term, check. The richest man in the world doing some crazy things to try and save humanity, check. giant squid washing up on a beach? Check. And the giant squid washing up on the beach happens to precede a disaster of such magnitude that it unites all of humanity. So that's where we are in the Watchmen to 2020 timeline lineup. So yeah, there you go. Christine Lemoyne, who do you watch Watchmen with? I'm going to watch it by myself, I guess. But we could have a watch party. Or was that a play on who watches the Watchmen? I think it was a play on who watches the Watchmen. Well, I'm going to watch the Watchmen. Michael Kaplan, are you a Watchman? Who will watch the Watchmen? And there we go. Okay, so moving on. Bethel, Ohio, just so that folks know, some disturbing things happening. And actually, Donald Trump, of course, being a terrible asshole, as usual. So Bethel, Ohio had a Black Lives Matter protest. It's a small town in Ohio, and about 80 people showed up in support of Black Lives Matter. 700 anti-protesters descended on the town from neighboring areas. Biker gangs teaming up with Blue Lives Matter, teaming up with All Lives Matter. Folks showed up with guns and bats and basically terrorized these poor, peaceful protesters. And wouldn't you know it, the police didn't do much. There was one protester who, peacefully walking away, got punched in the back of, they're always punching people in the back of the head. They're just so cowardly, they can't even bother to punch somebody straight to their face. It's disgraceful. Anyway, this poor fellow gets punched in the back of the head in front of a police officer, and the officer does nothing. Now, there is a crowd of like 20 people around him, but still, there were other photos of police officers breaking up a fist fight between a protester and a counter-protester, but honestly, it was absolutely a disgusting display. And this is followed by Donald Trump making the announcement that for people who protest the convention, his rally, I should say, his rally in Tulsa, that they won't be treated as nicely as they've been treated in areas like New York City and San Francisco, basically implying that they should watch out because things might get violent. Now, I want to just say this because it always sticks out to me. If you've never read In the Garden of the Beast, I highly recommend it. I've mentioned it before, I'm almost positive. Certainly, I've mentioned it in Facebook posts. The Garden of the Beast is a historical novel about the ambassador to Nazi Germany as it was becoming Nazi Germany, the US ambassador. And he's watching what's happening as Hitler is consolidating power. And one of the things that is really, really unique is that as Hitler is basically stymieing political dissent, the SA, which are the brown shirts, are going around being ruffians. Now, one of the things to understand is that the SA were just a regular component of the Nazi party, but they happened to be very aggressive and militant. They were encouraged to do things like join the police, join the military, and infiltrate these bodies. And when Hitler came to power as chancellor, the violence that the SA perpetrated to quiet dissent was basically given a blind eye by the German police force. Because, one, there were SA members in the police, but more importantly, because Hitler was now the chancellor, and basically law enforcement and other aspects of the government just sort of turned a blind eye to what the chancellor's party members were doing. But make no mistake, the SA were an integral part of stifling debate and preventing people from exercising their vote to remove the Nazis from power as Hitler was consolidating. So the violence that we're seeing, even though we might think can't happen here in the United States, and it is incredibly heartening to see people standing up. One of the interesting things about the book In the Garden of the Beast is that the Germans who are beset upon by the SA are, for the most part, they're very non-confrontational, and so people are not just there standing in a crowd of 700 people as a group of 80 just peacefully protesting despite this incredible threat of violence. Now, mind you, the protesters in Bethel ended up withdrawing. But the fact of the matter is that in the United States, I think people, it appears as if folks are a lot less willing to just walk away and keep their mouths shut about this sort of behavior. But I did mention that there is a recruitment effort by a Republican-aligned super PAC, which is recruiting folks not effectively, but specifically ex-military and ex-law enforcement to do poll watching, or that is to say, I forget exactly how they phrase it, but it was very militant. And it is not outside of the realm of even common tactics on behalf of the Republican Party to do voter intimidation by having burly men patrol poll sites on election day to keep people away from those poll sites in targeted areas. And if this is any indication, we can really, really expect that, if not threat of violence, appearance of the threat of violence this cycle. And if that acts as a deterrent to Donald Trump, remember, Donald Trump only won by a few thousand votes in 3 swing states, and really only a couple of county in those swing states. That can be enough to change the outcome of an election if done effectively. All right, Lily, scrutineers, extra buff scrutineers. Yes, exactly. Except that's basically how it is. Anyhow, so I just wanted to make that point. Now, the last thing, two more things before we get to what the city council did. The first is Senator Loeffler, who was under investigation for insider trading. You might remember this was a bunch of senators sold their stocks who had insider information about the coronavirus reports on the Intelligence Committee. She was just let off the hook. All the investigation, all charges were dropped against her. So there you go. And then I did want to mention, if you have filled out your absentee ballot in New York and mailed it in, and you feel like you made a mistake, you actually can go vote again in person. And if you vote in person, it overrides your previous vote. So you actually have the opportunity to change your vote. And certainly if anybody feels like they messed up their ballot, you can go and vote in person, and early voting is in effect right now. Okay, so let's talk about the city council. Oh, there's one more comment. On the bright side, many members of government, military, and civil society have stood up for the essential traditions of their institutions and refused to go along with Trump's agenda. Okay, there is one more thing I could talk about, and because Michael brought it up, let's throw it in there. The U.S. Agency for Global Media, which runs Radio Asia, Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, all these things, all these basically news services or propaganda services of the United States abroad, all of the heads of 4 of the organizations that fall under the U.S. Agency for Global Media have just been fired and not replaced. Donald Trump has put Michael Pack, a political crony of his, in charge of the U.S. Agency for Global Media. And now that one individual has basically total control over America's international voice, right? Like, that's really what it is. These were things that were set up during the Cold War, I think maybe actually during World War II, to broadcast into other countries and preach the gospel of democracy and the wonders of freedom and all sorts of other things. It's generally considered U.S. propaganda, but there's also some news component to it. But ultimately, what it really represents is a huge communications infrastructure by which the United States gets out a positive view of democracy across the world. And so, depending on what Donald Trump does with this, it could be a real sop to dictators, because throughout the Cold War, Radio Free Europe was a constant, and you see it in the movies. It was a constant source of inspiration, and actually during World War II. So yes, during World War II, a constant source of inspiration to folks fighting for freedom behind the Iron Curtain and behind enemy lines. Okay, it was the Cold War. but something was going on in World War II. I guess there was the BBC, I guess, was broadcasting to Europe during the World War II. Okay, regardless, let's talk about what the council did so that we can all have a sense. One, they followed through on their promise to ban chokeholds, although the state has already banned chokeholds in New York State, and that supersedes the city anyway. They also voted to change the disciplinary code of the police department and require that explanations be given when the disciplinary code is altered. So basically, like these, they basically ascribe punishments for certain behaviors and certain things which police set forth what police are supposed to do and how they should be disciplined when they step out of line. And then there's still discretion by the police commissioner. And so they've required that explanations be given every time the police deviate from the set code. Now, this is very similar to the changes that took place in the CCRB in the last wave of reforms that were done by referenda. And ultimately, I don't think it really does that much. Again, well, they changed the disciplinary code, and I don't know what the changes were. So perhaps it became a lot more, a lot stricter, but that seems unlikely to me. It doesn't seem like there was a huge outcry from the NYPD about this. And demanding explanations for deviation, why one would think that would have been something required from the beginning, but it wasn't. Basically, everything inside the police department was just a huge freaking black box. So congratulations to the city council for passing that, but one could hardly call it a systemic reform. What's number 3? Number 3 is a requirement that the police disclose all methods by which they surveil the public. Now that's actually huge. That's quite large. That means that every camera, every drone, if they're using drones, all of these things, every wiretap and every undercover person. There was a huge thing where the cops were sending undercover folks into mosques and were surveilling the Muslim community after 9/11. Every instance of a thing like that has to be disclosed, which is actually really big. Dismantling the surveillance state is a huge goal of civil libertarians, and I think it's absolutely fantastic. It's something that's only going to become more of an issue. It's good that we got out in front of it here, because this is going to be such a huge issue as facial recognition technology comes into play. And the police department already said that it was disbanding the anti-crime unit in favor of more intelligence gathering and surveillance. So this is actually, it's not a systemic reform to policing nor to police violence, but it is a systemic reform insofar as civil liberties, and that I can really get behind. The fourth and final thing that they did was they created a new system for flagging officers with complaints. So a task force that tracks flagged officers. What exactly that's going to amount to, who knows? But that at least is a pretty solid step towards potentially, well, actually, one cannot know because it requires a change in the contract of the NYPD, but it is potentially a step forward to better disciplining of officers and weeding out the problem officers who end up committing acts of violence and brutality and what have you. Although it is a systemic change if it results in a new system of disciplining and a new system by which we eliminate bad police officers and create a culture of good policing. But it really needs to be accompanied by other measures such as community policing, disarmament, demilitarization, and to its credit, the city council is already committed to defunding by $1 billion the NYPD to support other community-based programs. So with that, these measures might actually have a decently large impact. Now, the fifth thing that came out at the same time was a request to remove the statue of Thomas Jefferson in the city council chambers. Now, folks have had lots of opinions on this, whether or not we should be removing folks like Thomas Jefferson, who, yes, was a slave owner, and yes, was actually a rapist and raped a bunch of his slaves and had like a ridiculous number of children, who, you know, he didn't, that were just like, he totally didn't acknowledge. But he also wrote the Declaration of Independence. And he came up with that phrase that everybody uses about watering the tree of liberty with the blood of tyrants. And he also went against his own principles and got America 1/3 of its landmass with the Louisiana Purchase. So, you know, mixed bag there. But honestly, TJ is certainly not my favorite founding father anyway. But regardless, the question of whether or not we should be going around and purging these folks, we had a whole conversation about statues before and the difference between, you know, the founders and Confederates and what have you. But I'm interested to hear what people have to say. For my part, I don't really have a problem with removing Thomas Jefferson from the city council chambers. There are plenty of other statues of Thomas Jefferson, and the place for statues really is like in a museum anyway, in my opinion, where they can have some context. But, you know, open for debate. But why not have a New Yorker in there? There are a bunch of cool New Yorkers. I believe Alexander Hamilton didn't have any slaves. He was an immigrant. He was from New York. He was a total asshole, but that's beside the point. I mean, he's a New Yorker. All right, let's see. Dorian Key, did you hear about the police strike on July 4th? Do you think there will be looting? I did hear about the police strike on July 4th. I also heard that the police are denying that. I also heard that if a bunch of police officers just call in sick with what's being dubbed the blue flu, there's nothing that can really be done about it. But I don't think there'll be a bunch of looting. Ultimately, I think the only thing that the police will demonstrate by not being around is that we don't really need the police that much. That people can sort of solve their differences without bringing in people who have guns. And I just don't see a ridiculous amount of looting going on, because at the end of the day, the protesters did a pretty good job reining in looting in a much more chaotic situation. That being said, it's if a huge amount of the force calls out sick, it is disgraceful behavior. Let me tell you, look, people say that the MTA is trash every day. MTA workers still go in. Management still goes in to do its job and make the MTA that much worse every single day, regardless of all the insults hurled their way. The police getting in a tizzy and being like, well, we're all just going to quit. And basically what they're saying is, because you said mean things about us, we really hope somebody hurts you, right? We're not going to be there to protect you. We hope that somebody comes and murders your whole family, and that you learn your lesson, that you really need police around. That is the epitome of selfishness. They're giant freaking toddlers if they do this. And I have zero respect for it. And nobody who takes that attitude should have the power that the police have anyway. So I look forward to every single person who does that on July 4th just summarily being taken off the force. Like that's what should really happen. Michael Kaplan, it belongs in a museum. Indiana Jones and Ben Yee. Yeah, well, I loved Indiana Jones as a kid, so maybe that's where I got it. But yeah, it belongs in a museum. Dorian Key, can we talk about white fragility and how this new movement is at risk of aggregating the white-black cultural divide in this country? Can you be a bit more specific about that then? Because we can talk about white fragility, but what do you mean by this movement is at risk of aggregating the white-black cultural divide? Do you mean aggravating the white-black cultural divide? Yes. Dorian Key, white males identified as Democrat 48% before Obama. And after he left office, that number fell to 34%. I mean, we've been over this a couple of times. Not in this exact way, but we've spoken about it a few times, that the United States has a culture by which it absorbs some aspects of other groups into the hegemonic dominant culture and then discards other aspects and sort of pushes them off to the side. And eventually, its foundational principle of incorporating new people and new ideas and new cultures into the American ethos runs into the problem that it has to incorporate the harder components of other cultures at some point. And so right now, the United States is coming to terms with one of the biggest cultural aspects which it's put off engaging, which is the pain of the Black community left over from 400 years of slavery, Jim Crow, and mass incarceration. There will be a divide created by this, as folks come to grips with the fact that the lives that they thought they were leading and the acceptance that they thought that they had are not sufficient to cope with the actual reality of the Black experience in America. That being said, as we've said several times, I do believe that every time the United States encounters a situation like this, it moves through it and things change. Now, it's an incremental thing. It's not that it all happens at once, but there was a civil war for abolition, and abolition was also waged by racists. There was a civil rights movement, and the civil rights movement was waged by people who actually didn't want to desegregate their own communities. And now we have this movement. And each time we make these incremental steps, we reconcile more and more with our history and with one of these groups, which is being increasingly incorporated into American, like the dominant culture. And that's a good thing. And it's one of the things that makes the United States strong. And every minority, every ethnic group goes through this process. It's just that the African American identity and culture is one which has such legacy and such grievances and such pain that it results in the largest, most distinctive, most combative moments in our history. But that's okay. And when we get through this, we're going to be stronger. And the fact that a bunch of white people fled the Democratic Party after Obama, because it turns out that after voting for Barack Obama, racism wasn't undone, and claims that they are racist didn't evaporate. And the idea that more things have to be done to help Black people because one Black person becoming president wasn't the end all and be all of ending racism. The fact that people have to come to terms with that, that is part of the process. It's part of the process. And in this moment, we can have this aggravation, and it will be tumultuous today. But when we get beyond it, we're going to be in a better place, better able to incorporate everybody in this country into the vision of America, into the increasing goal of equality and equal justice and prosperity. And so, no other country really has this. No other country, and we've spoken about this in context of the strengths and weaknesses of the United States relative to China, and the fact that other countries are trying to exacerbate cultural and racial differences in the United States to hasten American decline and make our politics unworkable. And I'm not saying that that's not, it's possible that this whole thing ends up getting ripped apart. It just doesn't work. But what I like to think is that we're going to be able to cope with this, and we're going to be able to take these steps forward, and that each time we do this, America becomes better. and we demonstrate that the ideals that make the United States a unique country founded on principles and not an ethnicity or a nationality is a viable way of building a prosperous polity. All right, getting to these comments now. Dorian Key, what is the police union strategy to counterattack the BLM movement? Apparently, it's to whine a lot and then take off July 4th and hope that people die and blame it on black people so that they beg the police to come back to work and impose martial law and death squads. That might sound harsh, but I said it. All right. That seems to be the strategy. James Morris King replying to Dorian Key, grievance and more racism. Yeah. There you go. Simon Sachs, Ben, how about writing an online encyclopedia documenting every statute in each state and then build a crowdsourced function to have people debate whether each statute should remain or be taken down? Oh, statute, not statute, I take it. Okay, that's a lot of work for me. Does anybody want to take a, we can each take a county of a state and find all of the statutes, and then we can have, this sounds like a job for Reddit. James Morris King. Oh, there's a angry face on this. White people. Voting for a black president might end racism. Racism doesn't end. White people. Well, that didn't work. Let's try voting for racism instead. Yeah, exactly. Well, I do think that there's I was on the Obama campaign in 2008, and, there were a lot of interesting dynamics on that campaign. But I really do believe that there was a sense from some folks that they wanted to vote for Barack Obama and show that a black man could be president because they wanted to say that they can't be racist and America can't be racist. And they want to put that racist thing behind us because, look, this dude made it. And then very rapidly, upon realizing that this black president might try to do things that helps the black community, mind you, the black community, I don't know, you can't speak about things as a monolith, but at least many of the black leaders in the left circles of politics in which I traffic in New York don't feel like Barack Obama did jack for the black community. Now, I don't know what other segments, and maybe in the South or other parts of the country, obviously they appreciate him for the symbol that he is. But, when folks realize that maybe there might be some policy behind a black president that would help black folk, they began to think differently about whether or not it was good to have a president that wasn't white. And that is sort of how I viewed the flip in 2012. Barack Obama won by smaller numbers, and the rise of birtherism, the rise of the Tea Party, and the rise of some really, there were people who were protesting with effigies of Barack Obama, Barack Obama in a noose, calling all sorts of just the most despicable things. And, it really came out as soon as Barack Obama ascended to the presidency. Folks realized, wait a minute, we're not just saying racism is past, and we're not getting our, basically this get out of jail free card. And so they just doubled down on the fact that Barack Obama was a bad president. And in doing so, they couldn't help but use racist tropes, revealing exactly why having a black president was such a monumental achievement for this country. Dorian Key, what do you think about the theory that when the left, BLM, gets violent, the middle tends to side with the right, Republicans, like what happened in the Weimar Republic? Yo, a relative of mine, who I do not want to positively identify, posted that comment on my Facebook article calling out the violent counter protesters in Bethel, which we spoke about earlier in this segment. And all I can say is that it wasn't violent lefties that made the Nazis a fucking terror. It was Nazis, okay? So I don't want to hear this shit about, oh, when the left gets a little violent, it pushes moderates into the camp of the right, and then it's okay to commit genocide or whatever it is they think they're going to do, build a white nationalist ethno-state. Violence, I think, does tend to drive people away from your cause, which is why I'm a tremendous proponent of peaceful protest, civil disobedience, yes, but nonviolent. But I think it is absolutely misguided to blame one side of the political spectrum for the atrocities that another side commits. Okay? Mind you, the Reichstag fire was said to have been conducted by communists, and it was the precipitating factor to the Enabling Act, which created the authoritarian Nazi regime. And guess who said it? Not communists, Nazis. It was a false flag, a red herring. And so what do I think about this theory? Yeah, when the left gets violent, it pushes moderates to the right because they want the law and order thing. And moderates will have a tendency to break conservative if they think that their property is at risk. It's the nature of the game. But on the other hand, do I expect or do I somehow absolve them from them becoming fascists? No, that's on them. Mind you, the fascists are significantly more violent than the left. What about all those gunmen who had far-right, white ethno-state nationalist ideologies that whip out their assault rifles every so often and shoot people? Where's that going? Why don't we bring that up? What about these 700 people that descended on the 80 folks in Bethel? What about that? What about all of the protesters in Michigan that showed up with assault rifles to disband a duly elected government? We're going to talk about that. So that's an interesting theory, except that the right seems to be a ridiculously more violent at the present moment. And so focusing on the left, driving moderates to the right, why don't we ask why people who are in the middle aren't repulsed, absolutely repulsed by what they see happening on the right? And actually the answer is, if we did talk about that, we would see that folks are favoring the Democrats because of what's happening in the Republican Party and their violent rhetoric and their violent behavior. Dorian Key. James, I don't like how smug you are about white people. Well, you're just going to, I don't know what to tell you about that. That's James, man. Dorian Key. Unlike you, I've spent all my life among white people, working for both parties in New Hampshire, and mocking them is not going to help win them over or heal the country. Well, that I can certainly agree with. Mocking people, condescending to them, is not a great way to bring them over to your cause. And for my part, I really do believe in the power of listening as a fundamental aspect of persuasion. Listening to people, understanding where they're coming from, appreciating their experiences, and then trying to talk to them about those things. I think that's a regular part of the organizing 101 workshop I teach. And really, most people would consider that organizing like 401, like intermediate or advanced organizing, because really our organizing 101, most people would tell you it's just go knocking on doors and telling people what you think. But I think that's actually detrimental. I think, like my professor who said they should not let you take Econ 401, and they should not let you take Econ 101 unless they force you to take Econ 401. They should not let you take Organizing 101 without forcing you to take Organizing 401, because the whole part about listening is the most important part of organizing. Treating people with respect is the most important part of organizing. That being said, it can be very difficult for some folks who have had some very negative experiences with a certain constituency to be that envoy and do that part. So we just have to accept that not everybody wants to be in the role of doing that listening component. And that's okay. That is okay. Michael Kaplan. It was my sincere wish that the election of Obama would serve as a torch of hope for black people, showing that no obstacle could truly stand in their way. This did not happen. It leaves me very sad. You know, did Barack Obama prove that black people can do anything? I mean, I don't know whether they believe that or not as a community, but I think it did show that a lot of things are possible that maybe folks didn't think were possible. But did it fix the problems? It did not. Replying to Dorian, James says, kind of long. History says these shifts in political alliances are rarely left-right ideological and have more to do with long-standing cultural affinity groups. You can look at the French Revolution and see 20 different examples of this going in every direction. The Haitian Revolution was a microcosm of every, quote, side switching their loyalties between all the permutations of class and race. Lily, great idea, though. Not sure to which you're referring. If you could specify in another comment, that'd be great. Michael Kaplan, I remember a black volunteer would phone bank every night and cried on election night. Nobody will look at me or my son the same way ever again. Touching. Dorian. Seymour. Like it or not, black identity in America has its fragility issues as well. For example, Obama is half white, but black America seems to not even care about that. Plus, he was totally raised by his white single mother when his Kenyan dad bailed on his childhood. Obama is both black and white. Black America does not get sole credit for him. All right, I want to address this. Well, I suppose I'll let James address it first. But I have, as a mixed race person, I have extremely strong feelings about that. But what did James say? James, replying to himself, so not to dwell on that. Why do you presume I don't work in politics? Why do you assume, quote, healing the country requires only pillows, hugs, and handshakes? It also needs frank retellings of historical fact. All right, I want to address this Obama's not black thing. All right. So first, I heard many times on the campaign that Obama is not black, he's half white, from black people, all right? Which I thought was ridiculous, but who am I to tell black folks how to consider their, members of their community? And I kind of understand the argument that Obama did not grow up with what one might consider the traditional African-American background. His father was from Kenya, an African, and does not carry that legacy of American slavery and that history of Jim Crow and having grown up being deprived generation after generation of fairness in the United States. I understand that. However, racism is both systemic and overt. And insofar as overt racism, which is how most people conceive of the problem until very recently, Barack Obama is definitely black. Because at the end of the day, racism isn't about how you view yourself. It's about how others who don't know you see you. Racism is really about stereotypes, and it's about deciding that somebody is a thing based on the way they look without knowing anything about them, or failing to consider anything about them as an individual because of some external appearance. In that regard, Barack Obama is black. That dude did not walk into any place and get treated as if he were a white person or have anybody care that his mother was white because he looked like he was black. If he interacted with the police, they treated him like he was black. When he went to school, they saw him as he was black. All of his peers knew that he was black. And whether or not he sounded black or had the vernacular of a black person because he didn't grow up in the inner city or any of those things, the systems that are in place to treat one race differently from another and the stereotypes that are in place to reinforce that treatment all pointed to Barack Obama's blackness. So you can say whatever you want about Barack Obama being half white, but nobody cares about you being half white. Everybody cares about how you look, and that is the nature of racism. Mind you, when I get called chink, I don't come back with, hey, but I'm half white. I just say, you're fucking racist. Dorian Key, what do you think about that, James Morris? Oh, well, so now I'll repeat James's comment because Dorian replies to it. James said, why do you presume I don't work in politics? Why do you assume, quote, healing the country requires only pillows, hugs, and handshakes? It also needs frank retellings of historical fact, to which Dorian says, what do you think about that, James Morris King? Maybe he's responding, maybe he's calling out the Obama thing? I don't know. James goes on, sure, that's a conversation. My point is, how do you know these conversations aren't happening? Oh, maybe it was about the Obama thing? I don't know. Dorian Key, America and first world Western countries are in general center-right countries. No. I think most first world Western countries are in general center-left countries. The United States is anomalous in its center-right mentality. So they will always be slightly harder on the left. James Morris King, as an example, at various points in the Haitian Revolution, the big whites and the small whites traded alliances with various black revolutionary factions, depending on the change in relationship between Haiti and the metropole. So there are plenty of examples where the, quote, moderates and the right would flip-flop their left alliances during an armed conflict. Dorian Key, James, you realize the Haitian slave revolt eventually ended up killing all the whites on the island, right? Or making them flee for their lives. They raped white women and children, then killed them. Haiti is the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere and also nearly 100% black. Haiti is a total failure and a prime example of what not to do. Lily comes in for a moment and says, the statues wiki about taking them down, that was what she considered a good idea. A lot of work, though. James King, what does that have to do with the premise that moderates don't always shift right when shooting starts? Dorian, using Haiti as a terrible example for, all caps, anything, when the end result was the black slaves ended up killing all the whites. Michael Kaplan, I remember when Obama was asked about the accusation of, quote, not being black enough in an 2008 debate. He responded that it doesn't help him get a cab in Manhattan. Exactly right. There you go. Dorian Key, Ben, your perspective on Obama is completely unique to America, as in Latin America or South Africa, mixed people have a distinct identity and not allied with the majority black people who support the corrupt ANC. Yes, I understand that in Latin America and in other countries, there is a mulatto race, which is in between the whites and the native populations and the black populations. But that actually doesn't have anything to do with my point was that if you are going to say that there is racism, then there is a caste hierarchy based on how people look. Now, in the United States, nobody cares about whether you're mixed or not. You're either black or you're white or whatever. People don't actually, I don't think, people are confused about what I am, but once they've made a determination about whether I'm Asian or whether I'm white, they don't really care about the other thing that I am. It's the brown, the golden hair that throws a lot of people off. If this were all black, or I pulled this back like this, I get Asian a lot more. Now, that's beside the point. The point is that racism is about how you look and not about who you are. So Barack Obama's point that it doesn't help him get a cab in Manhattan is the very end of this debate. Like, people who are racist view Barack Obama as black, and he's not going to be anything more than black. And the dynamics in other countries are irrelevant, except to say that they all have racial caste structures, and they only care about, they care about what you look like, not about what you say you are, or what other people, whether other people deem you enough of that thing. They just treat you like they see you, and that's the problem with racism, amongst other things. James Morris King, replying to himself. Long one. Less non sequitur, Haiti has a fascinating history, and it's always good to remind people how lucky they are. They don't have to live with the consequences of a truly violent revolution. Also, Haiti's fortunes were always tied to the fate and interest of foreign powers. So if it's a failed state today, it's better to ask why those interests were, rather than what might happen when one side with a real grievance actually gets their pound of flesh. Also, war sucks. Who knew? Dorian, James, those black slaves paid for their violence when France came back with an army out for blood. Haiti had to surrender to France and paid reparations for over a century. James Morris King, yeah, that's history. What does that have to do with political alliances under a violent uprising? Lily, off to my run. Thanks for the food for thought. Pleasure to have you, Lily. Okay, we've done it. We've gone through all the comments and all the things I wanted to talk about. So let's do a section of the Magna Carta. Then I'm going to go watch Watchmen. Anybody know how many episodes Watchmen is? Is it like 9? I got to watch 9 hours of TV this weekend so that I can get the whole story before I lose free access. Pain in the bum. I don't even know if I have enough time to watch all that TV. Anywho, Magna Carta, Section 31. You are welcome, Simon. Section 31. Neither we nor any royal official will take wood for our castle or for any other purpose without the consent of the owner. This continues the long litany of things that the aristocracy and the crown promise not to do, which are the long litany of things the crown and the aristocracy promise not to take capriciously from the people of England. Really, really interesting. They could have just said, we're not going to take anything without representation in Parliament, but instead they just keep delineating the things they're not going to take. 32. We will not keep the lands of people convicted of felony in our hands for longer than a year and a day, after which they shall be returned to the lords of the, quote, fees concerned. So I guess if somebody commits a crime of a felony, if somebody is convicted of a felony, you're entitled to take their land for a year and a day, and then it gets returned to the lord who had given them that land in the first place. Dorian Key has a comment. Well, let's just do 33 and then we'll go to that comment. All fish weirs shall be removed from the Thames, the Medway, and throughout the whole of England, except on the sea coast. So no fishing, folks. There you go. And now to Dorian's comment. And then to the thing. To the eating, for me at least. Ben, I'm not interested in what is, but what really is. Deep. Very deep. Concerning racial identity, I'm sure Obama is himself. I'm sure Obama in himself, for himself, does not consider himself 100% black. In his education, in his mother, his family, etc. That's what truly matters. No. Not when we're talking about racism. When we're talking about racism, what matters is how others view you, right? Like, if I go outside, well, I'm maybe not the best example because I can kind of pull off either way. If Barack Obama goes out, if any black person goes outside, encounters racism and says, yeah, but I view myself as white or equal to whites, racist white people don't care. They care that you're black. Racism isn't about how an individual views themselves. Racism is about how one group views another group. And it's nothing to do with what the individual believes. It is the stripping of individuality that is the characteristic trait of racism or bigotry in general. Dorian Key, what also is the discussion about how lighter-skinned African Americans discriminate against Africans, immigrants, and also darker-skinned African Americans. Yeah, that's a thing. This is a complex identity issue. But now when we're talking about white people being racist, now we're talking about the dynamics shaping, it's still complex, but I feel like we've made the point pretty clearly. Racism is about how one group views another group. It has nothing to do with the individual, and it's not about shades. For some people within the subgroup, it can be about shades, but for the most part, if you're truly racist, an Asian is an Asian, a Mexican is a Mexican, a black person is a black person. And there are things that get attached to those demographics, which even if you do have an individual relationship and you happen to like an Asian, a Mexican, a black person, it colors your view of all the other members of that group regardless. So it's not about the individual. It is about a set of characteristics ascribed to a color. I'm not talking about external racism, I'm talking about inner identity. My only question is, why does that matter? Like, that's not really relevant to politics. What somebody wants to believe of themselves is not relevant to politics. Politics is about the public and the body politic. And what the other members of that body believe, that is where the individual encounters the polity and where the debate happens. Michael Kaplan, it was the same way in the Holocaust. The Nazis didn't care if you considered yourself Jewish. Yeah, matrilineal relation was how they determined Jewishness. And so it didn't really matter whether you thought you were Jewish or not. And that's the crux of racism. It's what people believe about you because of something you can't change. It's not within your power. And that's it. So thank you all for staying tuned and commenting and sharing your thoughts. And I hope to see you all tomorrow at 8:30. Until then.